Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. It's so hard. Okay, so your question, if I understand your question correctly, you would like to know what realistically do I expect the government to do at this point? Is that right? Okay, so it's a good question. It's a good question because it's complicated and it's simple, right? You did something wrong. When you do something wrong, you should try to make amends. Sometimes saying you're sorry is enough, but sometimes you have to do more. And I think in this case, where you had 17 million innocent civilian people who had done absolutely nothing wrong at all, ever, during the span of time that they were, um, arrested and basically convicted of slavery. Okay, it must have been a conviction because you don't subject someone to a lifetime imprisonment and for a cumulative 244 years among 17 million different individual people, and they've done absolutely nothing wrong, right? They must have done something wrong. Otherwise, what was done to them was completely unlawful. So you do this, right? And then you decide 200 years, I mean, 200 years is 200 years, right? 244 years later, that you want to be nice and let these people go. And you don't really say you're sorry, but you let them go. And that's it. You don't do anything else. And this is supposed to be justice, right? And this has been justice for the past 150 years because there has been no serious challenge to this. And I'm sitting here in 2021 and I'm saying to myself, wait a second. I mean, you know, it's been 150 years, that's true, but this is not justice and this is not right. And this needs to be said, even if nothing happens, if I don't get anywhere with saying what I have to say, or even if I get myself into trouble for saying what I have to say what I have to say before I leave this earth, because this is just so wrong. It's not just a little bit wrong, it's egregiously wrong. It is horrifyingly wrong what happened here. If the government were a private party or a series of private parties, imagine, if you will, for a moment, that let's take 10 of the top companies in the world today, including Google, Facebook, Apple, Barclays Bank, BNP Paribas in France, I don't know, 10, I could, IBM, I don't know, 10 big global conglomerates, right? Decided that for 1 year, just 1 year, not for the entire lifetime of the worker, but just for 1 year, they weren't going to pay any of their workers a dime. Why? Just because they don't have a reason. It's completely irrational. They don't feel like it, okay? They don't feel like it, okay? So they don't do it. They don't pay their workers for an entire year. And some of those workers, probably no big deal. They're probably rich as can be, so it's not a big deal. But for the majority of those workers, not getting paid even for a month is a catastrophe in their lives. It's a total catastrophe. Never mind one entire year that they're not paid by their employers. And at the end of that year, just imagine that these 10 hotshot, CEOs of these very, very rich companies, they say, okay, we've changed our minds. We're going to be nice again, and we're going to start paying them again. We're not going to pay them any back pay because we don't feel like it. But we're going forward. We're going to be nice about it. We're not going to do that anymore. We're good guys now, and we believe in human rights. We believe in labor rights, and we're not going to do that anymore. And voila, done. Right? What do you think would be the consequence of such a behavior in the private sector? I think that if the governments of these respective countries didn't go after these corporations, the governments would have been remiss and would have failed to meet their duty of care to protect people from this kind of abuse, right? I don't think, therefore, that it's any different when the government is the one who commits this kind of harm, because it's one thing to say it's private actors who did did this between 1619 and 1865, both in the U.S. and in the British colonies. But in fact, it was the government who authorized it, who condoned it, who policed it, who legislated to control it, etc., etc. So the government was very much involved in this conspiracy against the rights of these millions and millions of workers. We're not talking about 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000, not even a million. Approximately 17 million people. And we're not talking about 1 year. We're talking about 244 years. I mean, wrap your head around that if you can, because I can't, right? So the notion that, you sent me an email saying that, the slavery convention, because I said, well, it took them 80 years after the Holocaust to enact, adopt, sign, agree to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and, the International Bill of Human Rights, or etc., whatever, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the economic, social, cultural rights, political rights, all of those conventions. And that took about, I think, 80 years after the abolition of slavery. And so you helpfully pointed out that no, there was the Slavery Convention in 1926, which would be 50, 60 years after slavery, which for me is an embarrassingly long time. That these very powerful governments who had been involved in this state-sanctioned deprivation of human rights, civil rights, labor rights, constitutional rights, just all rights of civilians who had done nothing wrong, had voluntarily agreed not to be a part of the conspiracy anymore, and they basically signed off on the Slavery Convention after the First World War with the Versailles Treaty, League of Nations, all that. Following that, there was the 1926 Slavery Convention. And so I think you're trying to suggest that somehow that is penance enough for what was done to these millions of workers. And I would have to respectfully disagree. I don't think, again, if this were private parties and these 10 big hotshots, Jeff Bezos and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and just all these hotshot people, who decided voluntarily to, okay, after 1 year of just irrationally not paying our workers, we're going to be good guys again. We're going to start paying all the workers, no matter how they look and where they come from. And going forward, we're going to do that. And if they didn't attempt to pay back wages for that year, I think it would be a very, very, very big problem for everybody, including the government. So for me, the notion that these very powerful states, these monarchies and governments voluntarily decided to sign off on the Slavery Convention, and that they feel that that was enough to compensate for the wrongful acts against millions of innocent civilians, it's beyond the pale. It's beyond the pale. I'm sorry. I am not satisfied with that. I don't think that's justice. I don't think it's rule of law. Again, I think yesterday or the day before, we talked about the UN Law Commission and what they said about the state's responsibility for paying compensation and reparations for unlawful acts or wrongful acts that the state commits in the international domain. And so it's an obligation. The state is obliged to